In a distant land, in a time long forgotten, there lived a man named Job. He was not a king. He was not a warrior. And yet, his story would become one of the most powerful ever told. Job was a man of integrity, a man who feared God, and lived with honesty in everything he did. His life was full. A large family, children who laughed, who filled his home with life, fields that prospered, animals that multiplied, peace surrounded him, and above all, he remained faithful to God. But beyond what human eyes could see, something greater was unfolding. A test, not of strength, but of faith. And then, without warning, everything changed. In a single day, disaster arrived. Messengers came one after another, each carrying worse news than the last. His livestock gone, his servants lost, his wealth destroyed. And then, the final message, a storm, a collapse, and the loss of his children. Silence filled what once was joy. The house that once echoed with laughter now stood empty, and Job was left alone, stripped of everything, standing in the ruins of his life. And yet, in that moment of unimaginable pain, he did something unexpected. He did not curse God. He did not turn away. Instead, he fell to the ground and worshipped. How could a man respond this way? How could faith remain? When everything else was gone, days passed, and the suffering did not end. His body became weak, covered in pain, his strength fading, and still there were no answers, only silence. The kind of silence that tests the deepest parts of the human soul. And in that silence, a question began to rise. A question as old as humanity itself. Why? Why does suffering exist? Why do the faithful suffer? And where is God in the middle of pain? The story of Job was only beginning. As the days passed, Job remained in silence, sitting among the ashes, watching what was left of his life. The wind moved gently across the empty land, but nothing felt the same. The man who once had everything now had nothing, no answers, no explanations, only pain and questions. His friends came to him. At first, they said nothing. They simply sat beside him in silence for days, because sometimes pain is too deep for words. But eventually the silence broke, and with it came judgment. They began to speak, to explain, to reason. They believed suffering had a cause, a clear cause, that God rewards the good and punishes the wrong. So if Job was suffering, he must have done something hidden, something wrong. But Job knew that was not true. He searched his heart again and again, but he found no guilt that could explain his pain. And so his suffering became even heavier. Not only loss but misunderstanding, not only pain but isolation. And still he held on. He spoke honestly. He questioned deeply. He cried out to God, not in rebellion but in longing, in confusion, in the desperate need to understand. Why? The question echoed through the silence, through the sky, through the emptiness around him. And still no answer came. Time passed slowly, each moment stretching into the next, until one day everything changed. The sky began to shift. Clouds gathered, the wind rose, and from the storm a voice, not distant, not silent anymore, but powerful, present. God spoke, not with simple explanations, not with direct answers, but with something far greater. A perspective beyond human understanding. Where were you when the foundations of the earth were laid? The question was not meant to condemn but to reveal, to show the vastness of creation, the depth of wisdom, the limits of human understanding. God spoke of the oceans, the stars, the forces that shape the world, things beyond control, beyond comprehension. And in that moment Job understood, not everything, but enough. He realized that faith is not built on having all the answers. It is built on trust. Trust in the middle of uncertainty. Trust in the presence of silence. Trust even in pain. God had never abandoned him. Not for a moment. He was there in the loss, in the silence, in the suffering. Even when he seemed absent, he was present. And that changed everything. Slowly, peace replaced confusion. Not because everything was explained, but because something deeper had been revealed. A relationship, a trust, a surrender. And in time, restoration came. Life returned. Not the same as before, but renewed, stronger, deeper, more real. But the greatest change was not around Job, it was within him. And his story leaves us with a truth that still speaks today. A truth for every person who has ever suffered, who has ever questioned, who has ever felt alone. Faith is not the absence of pain. It is not having all the answers. It is the courage to keep trusting God when life does not make sense. When everything feels uncertain, when silence feels overwhelming. Because even there, God is present. And sometimes it is in the darkest moments that the deepest faith is formed.